The American Civil War is full of impressive historical landmarks, and its dramatic battles, personages, and themes still play upon the popular American consciousness. However, its historical significance in the field of maritime warfare and technology is not always as broadly appreciated by the American public as its landlocked battles. Yet the Civil War's introduction of ironclad ships to naval warfare was a milestone of global significance, and on the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, it is appropriate to reflect on the prodigious mind that spearheaded the design of these revolutionary ships, that of the young Confederate naval officer John Mercer Brooke. Brooke, a brilliant, if slightly eccentric young man, joined the Confederate Navy and quickly rose through the ranks when his technical talents were discovered. In 1861, Brooke met with the Secretary of the Confederate Navy, Stephen Mallory, to urge the construction of an ironclad warship, and only a week later he submitted to Mallory a sketch of a possible design for just such a ship. The product of his urging, the CSS Virginia, went on to battle the USS Monitor, the Union's response to Brooke's ironclad innovation, and the Battle of Hampton Roads. This legendary battle would render wooden ships essentially obsolete in naval warfare.
Brooke's childhood was very quiet, but his family's political and military affairs really foreshadowed his involvement in the U.S. Navy. He was born in Tampa Bay, Florida, to General George Mercer Brooke and his wife, Lucy Thomas, in 1826. When he was only 14 years old, he joined the U.S. Navy as a midshipman, and he went on to graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy about 6 years later. He completed the 9-month course in Annapolis, Maryland. And upon graduation, a few years later, he actually transferred to the U.S. Naval Observatory, where he would meet his lifelong friend and colleague, Matthew Fontaine Maury, and they would collaborate on a bunch of different projects that were really instrumental in the military technology of the
It was at the Naval Observatory that Brooke, alongside Maury, first demonstrated his technical prowess and innovative mind. Working on star charts and deep ocean sounding, Brooke and Maury developed a solution to the problem of deep ocean sounding, or the mapping of the deep sea floor. He created an effective deep sea sounding device, as well as an ocean floor core sampling instrument that were used for many years by the world's navies until modern technology replaced them. These inventions later allowed the laying of the world's first transatlantic cable and illuminated Brooke's talents as an inventor. Brooke left the United States during his tenure at the USNO to use these new charting devices in the North Pacific, and in 1859 his ship, the Fenimore Cooper, was shipwrecked on the coast of Japan. He was forced to remain there for a 6-month sojourn while his ship underwent repairs, and he seems to have become very friendly with the native Japanese. Upon his safe return to America in April of 1860, Brooke was greeted by political officials as a sort of expert in foreign affairs, and his personal letters to his beloved wife, Lizzie, seemed to indicate the brooding regional conflict between North and South was far from his mind. His 2-year absence from the country, as well as his personal inclinations, had him wrapped up in the experiments presented by his work in the North Pacific. But in 1861, the political storm broke loose, and Brooke was forced to take a side in the unfolding Civil War. He wrote to Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the U.S. Navy,
I hereby resign my commission as Lieutenant in the Navy of the United States. John Mercer Brooke, 1861.
This incredibly brief resignation seems to have been influenced by his wife's Southern ties and his love for his native state, since Brooke owned no slaves and had had strong ties to the United States government during his career in the Navy. Whatever his reasons, Brooke had cast his lot with the Confederacy, and he enlisted as a lieutenant.
In 1861, Brooke, along with William Williamson and John Porter, approached the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, with plans for improving the Confederate warships. Brooke submitted a plan to this committee to convert the frigate USS Merrimac into an ironclad warship, the CSS Virginia. There was some later controversy about the various incarnations of the plan, as Porter claimed the credit for the design. However, later scholars, as well as several of Brooke's contemporaries, and Brooke himself, contend the design was essentially Brooke's, with some input from his colleagues. Secretary Mallory later claimed the Virginia's design was all Brooke's idea, and Brooke received a Confederate patent for it. Converting the burned-out hull of the wooden Merrimac into an ironclad, seaworthy war vessel was no easy feat. Many contemporaries thought the ship clad in heavy iron would promptly sink. After some initial difficulties with the problems of buoyancy and speed, Brooke hit upon the idea of submerging a large portion of the vessel underwater. By submerging the bow and stern, the ship could cut through the water more effectively and rapidly, and only a small portion of the ship, outfitted with artillery, would be above the water surface. The committee accepted these plans with unanimous consent. Brooke designed the rifles that would make up the ship's armaments and took charge of procuring the iron plate that would constitute its armor shield. Brooke scavenged scrap iron, old smoothbore cannon, even tools, all of which were melted down into an iron plate, but he still came up well short. To make up the difference, the Confederacy began ripping up hundreds of miles of its own railroads, a measure of both its industrial weakness and its desperation. Brooke was also instrumental in designing more effective naval weaponry, and was the inventor of the Brooke gun, a heavy series of naval cannons that were produced at Trinidad Iron Works from 1861 to 1865. These were placed on floating vessels and coastal naval bases, and they included several reinforcing breech bands, which strengthens the gun's breech ends. Brooke invented special explosive shells, and more importantly, an elongated armor-piercing wrought iron bolt for both the 7-inch and 6.4-inch versions of his rifled cannon. He also proposed that the Merrimac be armed with a broadside battery of 6 9-inch Dahlgren smoothbore cannons and 2 6.4-inch rifles. Finishing off the design, he created a new 12-foot-long steel-pointed iron ram that extended the ironclad's bow by 14 feet. The Virginia's armaments, once completed, were described by a contemporary as formidable. In 1862, Brooke was made a commander, and in 1863 he was appointed the chief of the Confederate Navy's Bureau of Ordnance and Hydrography, where he remained until the war's conclusion. In 1862, during the Battle of Hampton Roads, Brooke's most prominent invention, the CSS Virginia, battled the USS Monitor in Norfolk. Despite the indecisive conclusion of the battle, it was nonetheless historic for its introduction of ironclad vessels in naval battles.
After the surrender of Appomattox in 1865, John Mercer Brooke was forced to search for other employment. In 1866, he became a professor of physics and astronomy at Virginia Military Institute, and in 1899, he became a distinguished professor. He also worked for the U.S. government as their expert in maritime vessels. In 1867, Brooke was given the Gold Medal of Science by the King of Prussia for his technological pursuits. He lived a quiet and intellectual life in Lexington with his wife until his death in 1906. John Mercer Brooke was an unsung hero of the Civil War, developing innovative and new technologies that are still relevant today.